Hancock Park, Los Angeles, October 1957, morning mail delivery. Maria Cole sorted through the mail at the breakfast table while Nat read the newspaper. Bills, fan letters, industry correspondence. Then she opened an envelope with no return address. Typewritten, single page. Her face went pale. Nat, you need to see this. He took the letter, read it once, read it again. His hand tightened on the paper. The letter described their daughter's daily routines in disturbing detail. Cookie's route to school, the times Natalie left for music lessons, the layout of their Hancock Park home, the security or lack thereof around their property, and then the threat: your success has made you wealthy. Your daughters are valuable. We are watching. We will be in touch with terms. It was signed, Friends Who Know the Value of Things. Nat's first call was to the Los Angeles Police Department. Detective Robert Morrison arrived at the Cole residence within 2 hours. He read the letter carefully. Then he asked to see the envelope, postmarked Los Angeles, typed, not handwritten, harder to trace, but suggests planning. The detail about your daughter's schedules is concerning. How public is that information? It's not public, Maria said. Cookie's school schedule changes. Natalie's music lessons are private. Whoever wrote this has been watching us. Morrison nodded grimly. That's what worries me. This isn't a crank letter from someone who read about you in the paper. This is surveillance. Have you noticed anyone following you? Strange cars in the neighborhood. Nat and Maria looked at each other. There had been a car, dark sedan, parked across the street for several days last week. They'd assumed it was a neighbor's visitor. There might have been someone, Nat admitted. Before we dive into how the FBI dismissed a credible kidnapping threat against Nat King Cole's daughters because they didn't believe black celebrities were valuable enough targets, how this forced Nat to spend over $50, $0 on private security, and how declassified FBI files later revealed the racist assumptions behind their refusal to help. Let me ask, where are you watching from? Drop a comment, because this story about who the government chooses to protect is as relevant in 2026 as it was in 1957. Detective Morrison took the threat seriously. He assigned 2 officers to patrol the Hancock Park neighborhood. He recommended that Nat vary his daughter's schedules, and he contacted the FBI. Kidnapping crosses state lines if they move the victim. That makes it federal. FBI has resources, LAP doesn't. Surveillance teams, forensic analysis, interstate coordination. They should be involved. The FBI Los Angeles field office received Morrison's request on October 15, 1957. The case was assigned to Special Agent William Crawford. Crawford reviewed the threat letter and Morrison's report. Then he made a determination that would shape everything that followed. The threat was not credible. His reasoning, documented in FBI files that would remain classified for decades, was straightforward. Subject is Negro entertainer. Kidnapping of Negro celebrity family members assessed as low probability. Insufficient ransom potential. Lack of public sympathy for Negro victims would complicate ransom collection. Assessment: opportunistic threat, unlikely to materialize. Recommend no action. In other words, the FBI didn't think kidnappers would bother taking black children because they assumed no one would pay to get them back. Detective Morrison called Nat with the news. The FBI isn't going to provide assistance. They've classified the threat as not credible. Not credible. A letter with detailed surveillance of my daughter's movements isn't credible. I pushed back, Mr. Cole. I sent them everything we have. But their position is that kidnapping threats against. Morrison paused, choosing his words carefully. Against entertainers of your profile don't typically result in actual attempts. Against entertainers of my profile, you mean black entertainers. Morrison was silent. Nat had said what Morrison couldn't. What do we do? Maria asked when Nat told her about the FBI's decision. We protect our family ourselves. Nat hired Executive Security Services, a private firm that specialized in high-value protection. The cost was staggering: $2, $0 per month for basic coverage. That was just for daytime security at the house and school escorts. For 24-hour armed protection, which the security consultant strongly recommended given the specific nature of the threat, the cost jumped to $4, $500 per month, over $50, $0 per year, equivalent to over $500,000 today. Nat paid it. He had no choice. 2 armed guards were stationed at the Hancock Park house around the clock, one at the front gate, one patrolling the property. When Cookie went to school, a security officer followed in a separate car. When Natalie had music lessons, the same. When Maria went shopping, she had an escort, the girls. Hated it. Cookie was 14. She wanted independence. Having a security guard follow her to school was embarrassing. Everyone stares, she complained. They think I'm weird. I know, baby, Nat said. But until we know who sent that letter, this is how it has to be. The letters continued, not frequently, maybe one every 6 to 8 weeks, but enough to keep the threat alive. Each one demonstrated continued surveillance. Your daughter Cookie enjoyed the school dance last Friday. She wore a blue dress. She left at 10:30 p.m. She was vulnerable. Natalie's piano teacher, Mrs. Henderson, lives alone. She parks in an isolated garage, easy access. The letters never made explicit ransom demands. They just reminded the Coles that someone was watching, that someone could act any time. LAPD kept the case open. Detective Morrison met with Nat monthly to review the situation. But without FBI resources, there was only so much a local police department could do. We're trying to trace the typewriter, Morrison explained in early 1958. The letters are all typed on the same machine, a Royal Portable, probably 1950s model. But there are thousands of those in Los Angeles. Without federal lab resources, it's needle in a haystack. The FBI has those resources, Nat said. Yes, but they won't use them for this case. The irony was impossible to ignore. Just months earlier, the FBI had provided full protection for a white television star whose daughter received a vague, threatening letter that mentioned watching her on TV. The threat had far less detail than what the Coles were receiving, but the FBI had assigned agents, conducted surveillance, traced the source. They'd solved it within 2 weeks. Turned out to be a disturbed fan who lived in another state and had no actual plan. But for Nat King Cole's daughters, with specific surveillance details and ongoing contact, not credible. The financial burden was crushing. Nat was earning good money, his Capitol Records royalties, touring income, television appearances. But $4, $500 per month for security was a huge expense. That was mortgage-level money. And it was money he couldn't invest, couldn't save for his daughters' futures, couldn't use to build wealth. It was protection money, paid not to criminals making the threats, but to security companies filling the gap the FBI left. Maria did the math one night in early 1958. They'd been paying for private security for 4 months, already spent $18, $0. If this continued for a year, it would be $54, $0 more than many families earned annually. Can we afford this? She asked Nat. Can we afford not to? He replied, but the strain showed. Nat had always been meticulous about financial planning. Now a huge portion of his income was going to security. The investment opportunities he'd been pursuing, real estate, business ventures, had to be scaled back or abandoned. The security firm recommended upgrades. The fence around the property should be higher, the gates should be reinforced, motion sensors should be installed, floodlights, a dedicated phone line for emergencies. Each upgrade cost money. Thousands more. Nat paid for them because what else could he do? In June 1958, 8 months into this nightmare, the letters stopped. No explanation, no final message. They just ceased. Detective Morrison advised caution. Could be they gave up. Could be they're waiting. I'd recommend maintaining security for at least 6 more months. Nat kept the guards for a full year after the last letter, just to be certain. By the time he finally felt safe enough to scale back to basic daytime coverage in mid-1959, he'd spent over $50, $0 on private security. Money the FBI could have saved him. Protection the government should have provided, but didn't. Years later, in the 1990s, FBI files from the 1950s began to be declassified as part of Freedom of Information Act requests. Researchers studying FBI treatment of Black Americans during the Civil Rights era found the Cole kidnapping case. The file was damning. Special Agent Crawford's initial assessment was there in black and white: Negro entertainer, insufficient ransom potential. Lack of public sympathy for Negro victims. But it got worse. The file contained a memo from Crawford's supervisor, Section Chief Donald Pierce, endorsing the decision. Agree with assessment. FBI resources should prioritize threats against subjects whose victimization would generate significant public concern. Negro celebrities do not meet this threshold. FBI had made a calculated decision. Black lives weren't worth protecting because black suffering wouldn't generate public pressure to solve the case. They weren't even trying to hide their reasoning internally. They wrote it down, filed it, and moved on. The file also revealed something Nat never knew: the white television star whose daughter received FBI protection. Her threat letter had been sent by a teenage boy who wrote it as a prank to impress his friends. No surveillance, no plan. No real danger, but she was white, so the FBI mobilized. The contrast was absolute: detailed, ongoing threats against black children, not credible; prank letter against white child, full federal response. When Maria Cole learned about the declassified files in the late 1990s, she was in her 70s. Nat had been dead for over 30 years, but the anger was fresh. "They chose not to protect our children," she said in an interview. "Not because the threat wasn't real, because they didn't think our children mattered, and they wrote it down. They actually put it in writing that black children weren't worth protecting." The files showed something else. The FBI never followed up on any of the threat letters, never analyzed them, never tried to trace the typewriter, never investigated who might be surveilling the Cole residence. Simply filed the reports Morrison sent them and did nothing. If the kidnapping plot had been carried out, if something had happened to Cookie or Natalie, the FBI would have had to explain why they ignored credible threats. But they'd gambled that nothing would happen, that the threatener was bluffing. They were right, as it turned out. Nothing happened, but they couldn't have known that. They just assumed that black children weren't valuable enough to kidnap. That assumption, racist, cold, bureaucratic, saved them from accountability. But it cost the Cole family 2 years of fear, over $50, $0 in expenses, and the security of knowing their government would protect them. The kidnapping threat case was never solved. The letters stopped, but LAPD never identified who sent them. The typewriter was never found. The surveillance was never explained. Maybe it was a sick joke. Maybe it was a genuine plan that was abandoned. Maybe the person got scared when they saw the private security Nat hired. Nobody knows. What we do know is that the FBI could have investigated. They had the resources, the expertise, the legal authority. They chose not to use any of it, not because the case was weak, because the victims were black. Today, when we talk about systemic racism, this is what it looks like. Not individual prejudice, though there was plenty of that. Systematic institutional decisions about whose safety matters. The FBI protected white celebrities based on flimsy threats. They refused to protect a black celebrity based on detailed, credible threats. The policy wasn't written down as official racism. It was framed as resource allocation and threat assessment. But the outcome was identical to explicit racism. Black children in danger didn't get federal protection. White children maybe in danger did. Nat King Cole spent over $50, $0 of his own money to protect his family from a threat the FBI dismissed. Money that should have been invested in his daughter's futures went to security guards because the government decided his family wasn't worth protecting. That's not ancient history. That's 1957, 1959, within many people's lifetimes. And the FBI didn't apologize or acknowledge the racist policy until pressed by researchers in the 1990s. And even then it was framed as historical context rather than institutional failure. The message to black Americans was clear: even if you're successful, even if you're famous, even if you pay your taxes and follow the law, your government might not protect you when you need it. Because protection, like everything else, was allocated based on race, and in the FBI's calculation, black lives, even black children's lives, weren't worth the same investment as white lives. Nat King Cole made it through. His daughters were never harmed. The threat dissipated, but the fear was real. The expense was real. The abandonment by his government was real. And the files prove it wasn't neglect. It was policy. The FBI chose not to help. They documented their racist reasoning. They filed it away, and they moved on. The Cole family never forgot. Maria kept the security invoices until she died, kept them as proof of what it cost to protect your children when your government wouldn't. That's the real story. Not a kidnapping that happened, but a protection that didn't. Not criminal violence, but institutional racism. Not a case the FBI solved, but a case they refused to touch. Because in 1957 America, the FBI decided that black celebrity children weren't credible kidnapping targets. And that decision cost Nat King Cole over $50, $0, and 2 years of his family's peace. The threat was credible. The FBI's response wasn't. The daily reality of living under threat was exhausting in ways that went beyond money. Cookie couldn't go to friends' houses without a security guard waiting outside. She'd make excuses to friends who asked, "My dad's protective." but the other kids knew something was wrong. You don't have armed guards for normal teenage life. Natalie, younger, adapted by treating the guards like family, learned their names, asked about their lives, normalizing the abnormal. Nat was hyper-aware now. Every car that slowed near the house, every stranger who looked too long. Maria noticed him checking locks multiple times before bed, positioning himself between the daughters and strangers, tensing when mail arrived. The threat had changed him, made him harder, less trusting. And all the while, the knowledge that the FBI, the agency specifically tasked with protecting Americans from exactly this kind of threat, had decided his family wasn't worth protecting. Detective Morrison did what he could with limited resources. He convinced the post office to flag any mail to the Cole residence that matched the profile, typewritten, no return address, local postmark. At least they'd have warning when another letter arrived. He coordinated with Hancock Park private security to increase patrols. He personally visited the girls' schools to brief administrators without alarming other parents. Morrison was one detective with a full caseload. He couldn't dedicate himself full-time to the Cole case, and he couldn't access federal resources. If this were a white family of your prominence, Morrison told Nat candidly in early 1958, the FBI would have a task force. They'd have agents watching your house. They'd have the letters analyzed in Quantico. They'd be running down every lead, but I can't make them care. The unfairness of it gnawed at Nat. He paid his taxes. Substantial taxes. He was in the highest bracket. Those taxes funded the FBI, funded federal law enforcement that was supposed to protect American citizens. But when his family needed protection, the FBI had calculated that black children weren't worth the investment. He never spoke about it publicly, never used his platform to criticize the FBI. He knew what happened to black celebrities who challenged federal agencies. He knew about Paul Robeson's passport being revoked, knew about W.E.B. Du Bois being surveilled and harassed. Complaining about FBI negligence could make things worse, could make him a target in different ways, so he stayed quiet, paid for private security, protected his family with his own resources, and internalized the message his government was sending: you're on your own. The $50, $0 represented opportunity costs beyond direct expense. In 1957, that could have bought 3 LA houses that would triple in value over the next decade, or been invested in stocks or college funds. Instead, it paid for security because the FBI wouldn't do their job. The FBI never acknowledged their failure or apologized. When files were declassified 40 years later, their statement was bureaucratic. Historical threat assessments reflected standards of the era, as if racism was just the era. The Cole family wasn't the only black family abandoned, but they were prominent enough that documentation survived. Their case became evidence of systematic patterns others experienced but couldn't prove. The files revealed it wasn't one bad agent, it was policy. Black celebrity families were explicitly categorized as low priority because the FBI assumed black suffering wouldn't generate public pressure. They put it in writing, filed it officially, because in 1957 America, that kind of explicit racism in federal law enforcement wasn't scandalous. It was standard.